you're gonna get free this time. Falling into a blue sky mind. Came to me in that song, my friend.
Hello, welcome back, y'all. It's Deb Air, and I'm the host of You, Me, and the Elephant. I'm just gonna geek out a little bit, I think. I was listening to somebody talk about Mother Earth and talk about Mother Gaia as Mother Gaia and talk about our planet in a way as it is its own spirit, entity, organism that is part of a whole larger organism, galaxy. And it really started initiating something in me, this curiosity, this expanded viewpoint that sometimes when I am taken out of like my everyday focus, my finite focus, and something like this brings me into a broader view that actually allows me to connect. Like the broader view allows me to find more connection into the finiteness of who I am. So bear with me as I geek out on some statistics and try to somehow find a episode in here. Thank you for taking the ride, as always. So as this person was talking about Mother Earth, I started thinking about, well, which I've thought this before. We talk about a lot about climate change, and most certainly, at least in our lifetime, we are seeing Mother Earth act differently. There seems to be a lot more shift in what's happening with our weather patterns. Right now, currently, there's a lot more fires that I'm aware of that ever has happened in my lifetime. That's just the climate itself. And then, of course, there's the climate of our humanity within the planet. And then there's all the different species and animals that have become extinct and ones on the verge of extinction, and then discovering new ones we never knew about. Point is there's a whole lot of mystery, and there is what feels like, anyways, a whole lot of change. And my intent isn't to clarify the mystery, because I think within the mysteries puts us into that gap space where we don't already think we know what something is exactly. And this actually makes me think of, I forget who I heard say this, that like facts are like facets, and they're like facets of understanding of something bigger, right? So, culturally speaking, within our humanity, we're often put a high value on facts. This is a fact. It's a fact until it's proven that it's a different fact. So, that's when you really start to follow the thread of history, you can see that that's definitely the case, which supports the idea of a fact being a facet, a viewpoint of something. So today, in this little bubble of conversation, I'm exploring the facets of our existence. No big deal. And how to use this expanding moment or this broader look at our existence and how we are connected to and what we are connected to as a way to either bump us out of circular thought processes, tunnel vision, stress patterns. I've heard a lot of people talk about the upcoming election. There's many different things that can make us perseverate in a very small viewpoint. So my invitation or my wish is that today is a little bit of a mind stretch and also a way to give you a little bit more of an exhale, a little bit more of ease, and maybe a perspective shift in this moment. So all of this planet talk made me think of when I look up at the stars. And I remember many years ago looking up at the stars with my son and being in awe. When we're in awe, again, we're in that gap space. That gap space is that place between the trapeze swings, that when we can let go of what we think we know is true, what we're worried about, what we're anxious about, long enough to be in the middle space of unknown before we grab that new swing, In fact, I think when we can do that, it actually informs or creates what swing we actually are holding on to. So that gap space is a place where there is not a specific time and space. You can travel anywhere. That gap space is, there's not just a certain amount of energy, there's whatever energy you need for a moment. So when we expand our viewpoint beyond what the ceiling of the mind and or the culture, we can open the shutter long enough to have a moment where some information is remembered. I think it's just forgotten. And I've said that in different ways on here, that the shutter can open, the gap space opens, and now we're able to have access to. So perhaps this episode will give us access to something more. So one of the things that started to happen, let me just back up, is that when I was thinking of the planet and I was thinking of when this person was talking about our planet, he was talking about like we're not really the organism, like the planet is, and we are part of the planet. And it made me think of our bodies. And it made me think that an average adult male sized person has approximately 36 trillion cells. And an average size woman has about 28 trillion. So the bottom line is we have a lot of cells. And what does this have to do with the planet? Well, I thought of the planet as a body. It's its own organism. It has umpteen million, billion, trillion cells, and we are part of this organism. So let's imagine that we're a cell within the planet in its existence. And what I know to be true thus far in my life is that our physiologies, our bodies, our cells do not work alone. And that is sometimes one of the challenges that happens in how we look at our health and how we approach our wellness or our sickness, right? We try to get rid of things. We are not really in culture to trust our bodies and trust that there is a whole ecology within these 36 trillion cells that work as one organism. And yet each cell has its own purpose, but must work in harmony with all others. And that there's this network. And it reminds me of Avatar, if anybody's ever seen Avatar, and they pray to the, I forget what the tree is called, but that it's connected to everything. And thinking of that and knowing what we know in our physiology is that our cells don't work alone. They must work in harmony. They must have what we call coherence. They must have the capacity to be in relation with all your other cells. So there's this network of information that's happening that's beyond what the logical mind, we can take a facet of understanding, to go back to the concept of facet, and know that this network of information and communication that's happening in our body is happening in such a way that we don't even have to think about it. And our brain is just part of those trillions of cells. So it's sort of like if you're a gardener, I am certainly not an expert, but I am learning. And when we talk about permaculture and we start to expand our lens, more and more of us are growing our own food, which is phenomenal. And I learn each year, like, what seeds should I plant next to what other seeds? What's the most harmonious way in which I can create or support an ecology that work together? They work in harmony with one another. And this is happening all the time in our bodies. And what's amazing, or maybe sad, I don't even know, is that we don't even think about that. You don't tell your heart how many times it's going to beat. And that heart is not one cell. That heart is hundreds of cells. And those hundreds of cells have a certain purpose, and they must be able to communicate with one another. And then those cells must communicate with these other types of cells, and on and on and on. The point is that there's an intelligence that is working through us and through each cell, and therefore through each type of groups of cells, which become organs, which become systems. We have holarchy in which this coherence and communication can happen. And this is just one body. And I remember this person, he used to go into and learn communities and different cultures that were impoverished and were having challenges with enough water, enough food, survival. And instead of going into that culture and saying, oh, you need water, let me give you water, what he would do is he would learn a culture. So instead of like, if there is a culture that needed water, he didn't just bring in water into that village or into that culture. He wanted to get to know the people and he wanted to get to know who lived there. So think of that culture or that village as the organism and all the individuals that are there to reimagine how he could use everybody's purposes, skill sets, like a heart cell, like a lung cell, like a liver cell, that each person had a place and a purpose. And that when you could start to reimagine and create a different kind of coherence, that was in fact the thing that allowed something to thrive. That really, another way of saying this is to be able to listen to what is and be able to, the reimagining, I think, is the expanding of consciousness. So when we can see more and that shutter opens for a moment, we get imprinted with more wisdom that allows us to see something different long enough to come up with a different organization or way or resolution or understanding of something. And that I believe is part of our way to evolve in the world versus, like I said, this person, instead of just going in and saying, hey, you need water, what he found is that sometimes our impulses or ideas can be damaging. So the very thing you're trying to help, like bringing water into a village, may actually create more problems because you haven't gone into the organism, seen how it will work and sustain itself. So I think there's so much happening in our world within this planet as an organism, us being part of that, that begs our attention. And I don't necessarily mean from the standpoint of shame and beating ourselves up or beating each other up that we're treating our planet incorrectly. I actually truly believe that the more kindness and the more conscious embodiment you can bring to your inner world and to your body, that is a direct line to serving our planet because we are part of the planet. I'm going to go on to some statistics just to broaden this conversation even more. So I already told you about how many cells we have. So that's a lot of cells. And again, no cell is working on its own, although it has a purpose on its own, but it is part of a whole. So then I started thinking like, okay, well, if this planet, if our planet is its own organism and we are just one of the cells or one of the important pieces of the planet, along with every other part. So not just humanity, all the animals, all the plants, everything, the soil, even the bacteria, like that, it's all part of this ecology that makes up this organism called Mother Earth. Then I started to think, well, how many planets exist? And when I looked up what is known thus far in the observable universe, there is 21.66 sextillion planets. Now, sextillion, to give you an idea, in American culture has 21 zeros after the one. That is a lot of planets, more than our beautiful minds could wrap around, right? So just take a moment to consider that all of the things that you've thought about today, all of the things that you've worried about today, perhaps perseverated, maybe beating yourself up that you didn't get everything you wanted to get done today, upset that you didn't say the thing you wanted to say, the worry, how many thoughts have just repeated themselves today? And in what viewpoint were you taking? Were you taking it from the viewpoint that we are one of 21.6 sextillion planets? Probably not. So that blew me away. And this observable universe, this statistic comes from the assumption that there is one planet for every star in the universe. Now, sometimes to go back to when I was looking up at the sky years ago with my son, I was like in awe and I was in that moment of like, oh my God. And it just really opened up my perspective in that moment. And it was interesting. And I want to acknowledge this. He was like, oh my God, that's overwhelming. And at first I was like, really? But I really get it that when we really start looking beyond what we're thinking about every day, what we feel is the most important thing, and we start to see how big our world could be, it can feel overwhelming because it feels like such a big gap between how we're living and what we're seeing, what we're imagining is out there. So I really want to acknowledge that I hope this isn't bringing anybody into stress. Instead, that it is offering this moment to just open the lens a little bit wider that can bring you into a more holistic, a more kind, and a more optimistic even experience. Okay, so there's 21.6 sextillion planets in this observable universe. Now, some think that there's other universes like the multiverse, but we're not going to get into that. Now, there's 2 trillion galaxies. So a galaxy is like you can keep going up in organisms, right? So a galaxy has its own system. So it's like an organism of planets and how they are interacting with each other. I've heard people talk about astrology, and some people are like, I don't believe in that. Some people are completely into it. The point is the one thing that I'm fascinated with the astrology, again, not an expert, is that it at least is it's science that's acknowledging that there is this system, there is a relational in astrology, I believe, I could be wrong on this, is really working even just with our solar system, which isn't even a whole galaxy. But our solar system has 8 or 9 planets. It depends on how you're looking at it. And I think there's many planets to really stay with this idea that we are not working alone. And if you imagine that we are a piece, we are a part, we are a cell in Mother Earth, and that there are 8 more planets and that they are in conversation with one another. So, how one breathes, how one moves, how one positions itself all affect the other. And that there's a lot of conversation happening that is invisible to us, but it is driving the tides, if you will. We all know that, astrology lover or not, that we know that the moon affects our water. So when we can start realizing that there's so much intelligence, there's this individual cell that we are. And of course, within our body, we have trillions of cells. But if we can just stay with our body as if we are one of those cells, that you have a very specific purpose, you have a very unique thread of purpose that is you, and that you are intrinsically linked to something so much bigger. In this case, let's say the planet, and the planet is part of the solar system. And then there's the galaxies. All of that wisdom exists within you because you are part of the whole. I think the challenge can come in because we are so not focused on this awareness. We are focused on the smallest minutia. And some of you might say, that's all great, but I need to get up in the morning and go to work. I need to pay my bills. I need to put gas in my car. I need to, I need to, I need to. And these are all true. But my question is this: if you on a regular basis could consider some of these facets of truth, how could it change how you look at what you're looking at in a moment? If you owe money to the IRS, that's not a fun thing to feel. But if you can look at it from a broader perspective and allow some more wisdom to seep through, might it have less of an impact in a detrimental way to the cell that is you and all the cells in the harmony? So, what are those things that you can do potentially that open up the scope, that open up the shutter to the gap space, that allow you to kind of go, and breathe in? It's that breathe in the memory, breathe in that we say this all the time. And there's one thing saying it, and there's another thing really being able to live into it. And that's that you are never alone. You are never alone because you don't really work alone ever. And yet you are an important part of the whole of the organism. So, as far as planets, there's a whole bunch of them. Galaxies, there's 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. There could be more. That's so hard, like I said, for our brain to wrap around. But I think the whole thing that this really, why I was inspired to even press record to make this an episode was we could all use a perspective shift. We could all use a moment to get a grasp a little bit or to be humbled, perhaps, that there is so much more access to help, to support, to wisdom than you can imagine, than I can imagine. And I think the journey is finding your own ways of how to access that. And there's many ways that I've shared already on here. One of the easiest things is what are the ways in which you can really, like today, I was sitting out here on my deck and I was looking at my plants and I was looking up the leaves, but my mind was really full of not that. And so my eyes, my actual eyeballs were looking at the beauty, but I wasn't actually taking it in. And I felt it. I felt the incongruence. And I had to stop and I had to breathe and I had to look again. And at one point, the wind was rustling the leaves. And I imagined the leaves rustling in my lungs and feeling this connection between the movement of the breath of the wind through the leaves and the breath within my cells. We were part of the same body. I don't have any like, here are breakthrough tips and here's the big elephant today. So it's a little novel in this episode. Sometimes when I'm working with you, I see your constellation. I will see energy move, and sometimes it's in the form of light. And then I see almost like stars in different parts of your body. And then I can see like a shape, like the connection of those stars, of those light pockets. And I realized that we have a constellation, which makes sense to me as I'm geeking out today on the connection that we are part of something so much bigger and even much bigger than the planet. And that when we can use that not as a way to feel small, rather a way to gain perspective that we belong, that we are so important as part of the whole. And if like every morning we woke up, even when we're like, we want to throw the covers over our head and we could remember or imagine ourselves breathing, let's say with the trees, or imagine that we are part of this incredible body of the planet and that how you love and take care of yourself is a direct line just by doing that and how you're taking care of our body together of planet Earth. Mother Gaia, planet Earth is brilliant. I think that we are in this evolution of consciousness, and she too has an intelligence that is working with other planets and within a bigger galaxy. Who knows? Like, we don't know, right? That there's probably planets and civilizations within planets that are much more advanced than us, and that there's planets that are much less advanced than us. They just have forms of bacteria, and that we are in this evolution as a planet, we being part of the planet that has emerging with this relationship of consciousness, of spirit, whatever you want to call it, that is growing. And perhaps the point of this whole conversation is how can you use that awareness to grow the love, the ease, the perspective for how you're living in your everyday. If you were judging what you looked in the mirror, if you were judging somebody else, if you were spending, 50, 60% of your focus on worrying about a political candidate, how can this awareness open your eyes in a way that allows you to see more? And instead of being so certain about what is wrong, could it open the door to allowing you, me, to see what is brilliant, to see the wisdom, to see that there's something bigger playing out that we may never know with our brain, but the more we are in alignment with our inner education of ourselves, that will prompt us to be able to see more than we will see on an average day, which I think can guide us to not only loving ourselves more, loving each other more. And I'm not saying that there's not difficulty. I think that we all know that with the light comes the darkness. The darkness knows the light because it is dark. The light knows it's light because it knows dark exists. It's how we find each other. So sometimes when we're trying so hard to be one thing, we don't want to sink into our edge. We don't want to look at what's hard. Then we're missing some of the strategy of the growth that happens as we expand consciousness, because we need to find that edge. We need to have the chrysalis, right? In order to push the fluid in the wings. I think it is an interesting topic to really stop thinking about such finite concerns and start allowing ourselves to be fueled by a greater awareness. Not only do these statistics blow my mind, but that there is within that an organization, a wisdom that I think sometimes it's easy to titrate down what God, universe, spirit means to us. When we can open up that perspective again and start to see things in a different reality of where we fit into all of it, I think that can open the gateway of our own understanding of the divine, of the wisdom, of the information that exists within all of what I just shared, that exists in every single cell in our body. And that we can tune into that, like tuning into a radio station. We tune in a little bit more, we get so much more. Thank you for indulging my geekatry of seeing these overlays. It's almost like if you're looking in a circus mirror and you keep seeing all the different versions of you in a line, this infinite line. It's like if you could imagine that you and all of us are parts of, if you imagine Mother Earth as this whole body, and we're all these intricate parts of her, not just humanity, every part of her. If we are not working in harmony, there will be more and more separation. And what happens, for instance, in the way of cancer, it's an adaptation that says, no, I am separate. So it starts creating its own separate forms of cells that don't work in harmony with the rest of the body, so that the whole becomes in detriment. And I think that's what we're seeing in our planet and in the climate. The more we focus on how separate we think we are, the more we're creating little cancers within our own population, within our body, within our cultures, within our world. How can expanding the viewpoint for a moment allow us to remember that through all of the different viewpoints that this mind can create for us, and that we see that we have far more in common, and that it is through that connection where we find the whole working together. And that part of our growth will always be the edges, that it's not trying to not be the edge or not be the darkness and point your finger to other, like they're the bad, versus, oh, wait, we're in this together. So let me look at the dark within me, because I know on the other side of that, I will find light. I hope this was in service to somebody out there. Thank you for entertaining my geekiness in regard to galaxies and planets and our bodies and how we are such a network of something. So until next time, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now, Trevor Hall with Blue Sky Mind.
It's in and through the body, all along, in and through the body, all along. It's in